Hey, everybody. The Next Lawyer Up podcast is sponsored by Bond & Botus. You can find us at bondandbotus.com. That's BONDANDBOTES.com. We practice in the areas of consumer bankruptcy, consumer law, including collection and telephone harassment, credit report issues, tax issues, security clearance issues, Social Security disability, and VA disability. So, with that, let's start the show. Welcome to the Next Lawyer Up podcast. I'm attorney Ron Sykstus. I'm located here in Huntsville, Alabama, and my law practice is primarily in Alabama and in Illinois as well. And today we're going to be talking to attorney Dave Phillips. He's with Phillips & Phillips LTD, and I do recall from my early Chicago days, I loved how law firms there are allowed to be, as far as their corporate structure, limited, LTD, chartered, which I always thought was very cool. And I always thought if I was back up there, I would be either limited or chartered. That's got kind of an English flair to it. But in any event, so Dave Phillips, tremendous lawyer, one of the stalwarts of the consumer plaintiffs bar nationwide. Dave speaks all over the country all the time on this federal law and the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. And for those of you who are interested, it's found at 15 U.S.C. 1692. To me, it's one of the superlative laws in our country. And the thing I really like about it, it's 8 pages. Start to finish, it lays it out. It protects consumers from unscrupulous and illegal debt collectors, third-party debt collectors. And it... there are protections for people being harassed illegally by debt collectors, whether that's in writing, letters, or over-the-phone type abuse, or any other type of abuse. Dave Phillips is he's got to be within the top, if not top 5, top 3 masters of this law nationwide. So I'd put him, within top 3, top 5. I can think of 5 names that he's always in that. He would always be in that... in those 5 names. Just tremendous. He's a University of Illinois College of Law grad, went to Loyola in Chicago as well, a Chicago guy like myself. He essentially lives in the 7th Circuit. I've never seen someone do so much appeal work as Dave. I think he's got at least 20, if not more, cases to his credit that have gone all the way through the 7th Circuit. And frankly, the body of law in this area, the body of law in the FDCPA, which is what we call, that's the acronym for the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, the body of law in the 7th Circuit is largely because of him and a few other very talented lawyers here in Chicago. So in federal district court, which is the court level below the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, Dave's got hundreds of cases there. So, and as far as class actions, there's probably not... I can't think of many better class action lawyers than Dave Phillips. Just tremendous. So, but we'll get to know him and we'll learn about him today and we'll talk to him. So I hope you enjoy it. Well, welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate being here.
So we're actually speaking here in Birmingham. How do you like Birmingham?
Love it. Although I didn't get to see much of it. It was airport, nighttime, hotel conference room. So, the hotel environment seemed fine, and hopefully I'll get a little outside to see a little bit of the city too.
Now, is this your first time to Birmingham or to Alabama?
It is. First time to Alabama.
Okay.
One of the few states I haven't visited.
Now, your accent is much thicker than mine. Now, people here tell me
much clearer than yours.
Well, clearer. Well, the people here tell me I still have, some Chicago affect, but I certainly hear it in yours.
I would agree it's probably a clearer Chicago accent. Although, oddly enough, it's a Wisconsin accent.
Maybe that's what I'm hearing. So tell me, where did you grow up?
Well, my folks were from Wisconsin. My dad was from
whereabouts?
A little town called Mineral Point, which...
Relate that to me from Chicago.
Well, if you go straight up to Madison, right on the borders Beloit, Above that's Janesville, where Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, is from. And above that's Madison. So if you go up to Madison and you make a left and go out about 50 miles, that's Mineral Point. The place that's better known that's right next door is Dodgeville, which is where Land's End.
The Land's End, okay. Right.
My mother was from Beloit.
Okay.
So my father met my mother after he served in the Navy. He was a bread salesman or a milk salesman, and my mother
up in Wisconsin,
in Beloit, Wisconsin. Gotcha. They lived above our little store, and my dad came calling, and my dad asked my grandmother if he had any daughters. She had any daughters he could take out on a date, and he took my mother out.
That's funny.
The rest was history.
That sounds like old school. Right?
It was.
So where did you grow up in Wisconsin?
No, actually, my mom gave birth to me in Wisconsin and brought me back right down to Illinois, to Woodridge, Illinois, where I lived till I was 7.
Okay.
And after that, I moved down to a place called Oak Forest. I'd say Oak Forest is where I grew up, and that's for people with interstate knowledge. It's 159th and I-57. It's a southwest suburb of Chicago.
Okay.
Sox territory, not Cubs.
Are you Southside? You're Sox?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw the World Series 11 years ago in 2005.
Right. Did you bother to watch this last time?
It was fun to watch it, but it wasn't the be all and end all for me.
Right. That's funny. Now, all right. So you've met Brad Botus, and I should explain at the outset the reason we're talking here in Birmingham. You're here for our Bond and Botus party, and we use this as kind of a firm get-together. And I've said in the introduction before you got here that I consider you within 5 to 6, 7. If there's 5 to 10 names, maybe you think there's more. In my head, there's 5 to 10 names that are the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, the FDCPA experts, and you're probably gonna, you may disavow that. You know how it is. I'm calling you an expert, but so you're one of those people. I mean, that's how I got to kind of know the law from hearing you speak years ago. We brought you in here. That's why you're here in Birmingham.
Well, I think it's one of those things. If you stick around long enough, you become an expert. But yeah, I've done a lot. I know a lot about it. I've taught it a lot to a lot of people, and I enjoy the practice areas because it's fun. You're helping people stand up to bullies.
Right. Well, so now let's back up. So I just wanted to use that as kind of a preface as to why we're talking here in Birmingham. So you met Brad Botus, and so I talked to Brad. We did the same podcast several weeks ago, and he and we actually talked the night after the Cubs won the pennant. Brad, like myself, is from Chicago. Now, I'm a North Sider, right? Long-suffering Cubs fan. So when I hear you say you grew up in Woodridge,
right?
Okay. So I think I told you before we just started doing this. So I grew up in the city, then moved out to the suburbs, Arlington Heights, Wheeling, Buffalo Grove area. I have no idea where Woodridge is.
Well, Woodridge is kind of out there by Naperville, Wheaton.
Okay.
DuPage County.
Yeah, okay. I got DuPage County. Right.
So if you were growing up in the city, you needed a passport to go out to the area where I grew up. Okay. Either south or west. Woodridge, you would have needed a passport to leave your Chicago environs. Right. And, of course, as a North Sider, once you cross Madison Avenue, the north-south street that divides Chicago, you needed a passport to get down to where I lived and grew up in Oak Forest.
Well, now I should say this. So you grew up in Oak Forest. Now tell me where that is. And I sound like I'm kind of a bumbling idiot with Chicago.
That's all right. It's right near I-57. It's Orland Park, Tinley Park, Oak Forest. It's 159 South.
Okay.
And in that area.
So Oak Forest, where is that?
Right around I-80 and 157th
Where is
Street.
that in relation to Oak Lawn?
Close. It's within spitting distance.
Okay.
Like my office is in Palos Hills.
Okay.
So if you did a triangle, it'd be Oak Forest at one corner, Palos Hills at another, and you could have Oak Lawn at the third corner within 10 miles of each other.
No. So your office is in Palos Hills. How far are you from downtown Chicago?
20 minutes, 20 miles. Depends on the traffic, obviously.
Okay.
But, most of the time I don't go downtown.
Right. I mean, you only go down there for court, but in federal court there's probably not that many hearings, a lot of briefing.
Well, in Chicago there's more hearings than any place else I practice because most other courts, do a lot of stuff over the phone.
Right.
But not Chicago.
So when you travel, do you take the train in or you drive in?
No, I drive. The train doesn't let you stop when you want to. Train doesn't let you play your own music as loud as you want.
Right. Most native folks drive in.
Yeah. I know.
So now where did you go to high school?
So here's my school background.
Right.
So I went to Catholic grade school.
Right.
Got tired of that part of with the nuns and the nonsense because we had real nuns back then.
Well, are you Southside, what I like to call, for one of my buddies, one of my law school roommates, real good guy, last name O'Brien. Are you Southside Irish?
I'm Southside half Irish.
Okay.
But not Southside Irish because we came from Wisconsin.
Right, okay.
So we weren't a D's, Dems, and Does
Right.
Irish like the Daly family or Bridgeport. Right. But I grew up there, went to grade school, Catholic school, and had enough of the nuns.
Right.
Went to Oak Forest High School, public high school.
Did you ever get the ruler as the ruler to the hand?
Oh, my first day in first grade, I saw a nun body slam one of the other kids in the chalkboard. We didn't get the ruler. What we got was a pointer, big long pointer, that the nuns used like a samurai sword on you. And then we had one nun who was just the meanest SOB you ever met, who if she thought you looked funny at her or that she thought you talked, she made you kneel down at your desk the entire day. Entire day.
That's crazy. That's almost military-like.
It was very military-like.
She didn't use the pointer, though, on you, did
No,
she?
I knew enough not to do any of that.
Now, how long did you go to grade school there?
Well, I went 6 of the 7 years in Oak Forest, 2 in Woodridge. And then I went to Oak Forest High School.
Okay.
Did okay there. Not great because I could wake up and get an A or get a B.
Right.
And I also was working in high school for my dad.
And what kind of work was your dad doing?
My dad, he started out, he was a general manager for an old oil company called Clark Oil. And he was a general manager and he had about 100 stations under him.
Wow.
And then
all through the southwest,
south suburbs and northwest Indiana.
Gotcha. Okay, so he had these stations.
Yeah, he general managed 100 stations through southwest Chicago, northwest Indiana, and he got tired of doing that, so he decided after the first oil crisis in the 70s to open his own stations. Ultimately, we had 8 gas stations, various kinds, a lot of Amicos. Or Standard Oil in Indiana.
AA MCO, right? No,
that was Amco.
Amco.
That was the transmission place. Close, though.
I'm mixing my metaphors, I guess.
Mixing your stations. And then we had an Arco.
Right.
AM, PM, Mini Mart. We actually had a Phillips, spelled Philips.
Okay.
Phillips 66, because my name's spelled with 1 L, 2 P's.
Right.
So we worked at the gas stations, pumping gas, changing oil, fixing cars.
Now, did your dad own the stations?
Yeah, he owned 8 of them.
So small business owner.
Right, small business owner. And, we worked our way through that. And I mentioned to you earlier that I had an epiphany one day when it was 20 below. And I was getting yelled at by a lady.
How old are you during this
16.
This, I guess, penultimate moment in your life.
Yep, before I decided to move on with it. The lady started yelling at me. She got $2 worth of gas and wanted me to work a chemical miracle to get a quarter-inch of salt off her windshield.
And let me guess, you're bundled up, you got the parka jacket on, and you've got the gloves on. Miserable.
And I had tennis shoes on. My feet were frozen. And she's yelling at me, use some of that blue stuff, because I was just trying to wipe it off with towels because the blue stuff didn't work.
You mean the blue stuff in those...
Windshield solvent.
Okay, gotcha.
And I pulled the squeegee out of the bucket with a solid block of blue stuff on it.
Right.
And I looked at her and I said, you mean this stuff? And I just walked away. I'm like... I
so
can't
you're
do
16?
This. Yeah, I can't do this. This is nonsense. I just told my dad, I can't do your business. This is nonsense. I'm going to go be a lawyer or something because I'm not putting up with this.
But now at 16, does your dad think, listen, my kid's kind of a punk? What are you doing?
My dad understood.
Get back out there?
No, he knew I'd go back out there, but he agreed with me. He said, yeah, this is nonsense because right at that period, the only good part of the gas station business was repairing cars.
Right.
Wrenching, souping up your cars, fixing cars. That was fun.
Did you do that?
Oh, sure. So
are you pretty handy that way with cars?
I was till it all became computerized in the 2000s.
Right.
But wrenching, you could make some money. Gas, you just made a penny a gallon or some amount, because the oil companies wanted to give the gas away and make it all up in your service department.
Right.
And right about then, they started ripping out all the gas stations, the old gas stations, the old porcelain palaces, remember, with the two bays, the porcelain tile, and turned them all into mini-marts. So we went from being able to be mechanics and doing something kind of manly to selling ho-hos and Pampers, which wasn't real interesting to anybody.
But so, your dad stayed in the business, though.
He stayed in the business till the health made him sell them off. So I went to Loyola, put myself through school. I'd saved up a bunch of money from working in the gas stations, and I went to Loyola in Chicago. And I know kids today now do a lot of, background check and investigations and videos and projects.
You mean as far as figuring out where they're going to go to school?
Oh, no, just it's like the CIA, trying to plan an invasion of some sort. And, MASH was big when I was a kid.
Right.
Father Mulcahy wore a Loyola sweatshirt.
Right, I remember. Right.
My aunt had gone to and it's a Jesuit university. Right. My aunt had gone to Marquette Jesuit University, and I thought, I'll go to Loyola. It's right there. It's close enough. I drove myself to the campus. I looked around. I said, this place doesn't bother me. Okay, I'll go here. I applied to that one school, and that was it.
No, Loyola's a private school, though, so you knew you were going to pay private school tuition.
Well, here was the rub. So I wasn't straight A because I didn't need to be until I realized that all the whopping money I saved up from working in the gas stations would get me through one semester.
Right.
So I realized that, and I decided, I better pay attention. So I got straight A's that first year, and then was on a full scholarship.
At Loyola.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I did real well there, and then I had enough of the Catholics and the Jesuits then, so then I went down to the University of Illinois for law school.
Well, now in college, did you commute, or did you live on campus?
I lived on campus. It was close enough that that you could go home on the weekends if you wanted to, or if you need some help from mom, or they could come visit you. But it's far enough away that you were away at school.
Now, where is Loyola? Kind of put it in context for
Loyola is right underneath Evanston, where Northwestern University is. So it's on the northeast. It's right on the lake. It's a little postage stamp campus, really small. Nice.
Where's DePaul? I was thinking of going to law school at DePaul.
Yeah, DePaul was right down the L track. It was in Lincoln, an area called Lincoln Park, and they were both big-time rivals. Because they were not Jesuits, they were a different brand of Catholics, and both of them had
really kind of fallen off the map, right? I was in the who was it? Ray Meyer, Joey Meyer.
Basketball-wise, they fallen off the map. The school's doing pretty well. So's Loyola. At the time, both Loyola and DePaul had good basketball programs, but they both have kind of, gone away.
Who was the coach? Was it Ray Meyer, right?
Ray Meyer, and then his son Joey Meyer tried to take over, and nothing ever happened there.
So you're at Loyola. Now, what do you study in college?
Well, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, so I took the lawyer route. I poli-sci and history major, and I also had a third major, which was the honors program. So I was a year behind in the honors program because I was just a regular student the first year. Then I was in the honors program, and you had to get credits, honors credits. Right. Some classes were honors credits, and some you did a paper to get honors credit. And I had to do extra because I missed a year.
Right.
And when it came down to my last semester, I went to the head of the honors program just to confirm everything was good, and he said, you didn't get credit on one of these courses. And the professor never told me that. And I'd done the work. I'd written a paper. And it was a B+ paper, the professor said. And the professor just declined to give me honors credit because he thought he should only give honors credit, even though it's extra work,
for an A
paper.
What kind of substandard work is this?
Yeah, but the whole point was doing extra work.
Right.
I could see if he had an attitude of it was a C or a D paper, it was a B+.
Right.
But the head of the honors program, Dr. Rank, said, "No, that's okay. You still have enough credits. What are you worried about?" I go, "Well, I didn't get honors credit there."
Right.
And I pointed to a class that had honors credit on it. He goes, "I don't know anything about that." So one guy gave me credit where I shouldn't have gotten it.
Right.
And one failed to give me credit when I should have gotten it. So you never know how those things work out.
Now, how did you change your scholastic trajectory? So you're 16, pumping gas.
It was all about the money, man.
But I mean, could you have always been a good student, or did you really have to apply yourself in college?
No. I could always. That's why I said I could wake up and get a B. If I actually paid attention, an A was pretty easy.
Do you have a photographic memory, or do you, or you just you can do
I'm just
well?
good at applying myself on stuff. Once I start looking at it,
right?
Yeah, not photographic, but good enough.
Right.
Good enough.
So, before we go into law school, and I like to kind of, I want to just kind of follow your history a little bit. But this occurs to me, and I asked this of Brad Bodis. So we're about the same age, grew up in Chicago. A really important component to my life growing up was Chicago talk radio. Not everyone's like that. Were you into like Steve Dahl?
Sure.
I mean, was it important to you?
Yeah, he was interesting. He was way more important than my brother.
Right.
Because my
so
brother
you know what I'm talking about when I bring up that Chicago talk radio.
Because there was Brandmeier, there was Dahl, there was
Kevin Matthews.
There was Brandmeier, not Brandmeier. There was Lujack, Larry Lujack, and all those kind of things. But yeah, I was probably more of a Steve Dahl kind of guy. I wasn't quite the generation that was totally wedded to him like my brothers.
Right.
Where he went. He was actually at Disco Demolition.
Was he really?
At the old Comiskey
Park, right.
Yeah.
That's where they blew up.
We blew up the field.
Right, and then they canceled. Wasn't there
they forfeited the rest of the game. Right.
Crazy.
Right. But yeah, I grew up on talk radio because it was a lot of good radio there.
Right. That was so important to me. And so when I left Chicago and I was in the Army. Whenever I would come home, the first thing I had to do was turn on, whatever station was whether it was the Loop, right, WLUP, or then CKG.
Lorelei.
Yeah, I had
Loop Girl.
Right, the Loop Girl. I had to listen, and then I was just like. So anytime I came home, so yeah, that's one thing that I kind of miss, and you now can get it nationwide, but. That was very peculiar to Chicago.
Yeah, now you just crank on your Sirius radio. Right. You got Howard Stern 24/7.
24, all that you want. All right, so you graduate, and then what do you decide to do after a Loyola
Well, I knew I wanted to go to
graduation?
law school, so I applied to various law schools. I got into the University of Illinois, and oddly enough, my sister, who was going to be when she went to undergrad at Northwestern, wanted to be a doctor.
Wow.
She got creamed in some of the advanced math classes because our school, although she was the valedictorian and the top of everything, wasn't anything compared to some of the North Shore schools.
Right.
So she had graduated from Northwestern, did okay, but not on the doctor path.
Right.
She took a year off, and all of a sudden she decided, I'll go to law school too. By happenstance, we both wound up at U of I in the same class.
Oh, no kidding.
And in the same section, because there was three sections.
Right.
They put us in the same section. And for those who don't know about law school, usually the first year, they group you in a section, and they seat you alphabetically. And they have a little chart with your picture on it. So not only was I at the same law school with my sister, in the same section, I was in the same row, seated right next to her, which brings up an interesting problem, because in law school they have a thing called screw your neighbor, and that's not a good thing, but if you didn't answer a question, if you said pass, the way the professor would kind of discipline you is they would ask the person on your right or your left, and I knew I couldn't pass because it would go to my sister and she would hit me in the ribs hard if I passed into her, so I always had to be ready.
Well, had you thought about going to law school at Loyola? And I say that, U of I is a great school.
I had been admitted to Loyola. Loyola was $10,000. I got into University of Illinois, it was $5,000. And Loyola and U of I was rated way higher than Loyola at that time. So there was no thought at all on that.
Right.
Because law school doesn't have scholarships for most people. It's all you got to self-fund it.
Right. So how do you do in law school? Pretty well?
I did well enough to get a judicial clerkship after I was done. I got a judicial clerkship with the Illinois Supreme Court with a guy named Ben Miller, Justice Miller.
Going back to law school, how did you, I tell folks kind of I actually found law school, it wasn't as intense, in college you have tests, papers, repeatedly. Law school, it's, all eggs are in one basket at the end of the semester.
Well, in our generation, before we applied to law school, we saw that movie 1L come out, and the book by Steve Turow, 1L, where it just looked like, they're being tortured on an hourly and minute-by-minute basis. And when you got to law school, you realize, no, it's not quite right.
Right.
And I thought it was a lot easier than the workload in college.
Well, especially when you don't have the professor not giving you the due credit, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I always got the credit there. And I had a clerkship down there while I was in law school with one of the professors. And then I was a legal law clerk for a law firm there that had a really weird, for Champaign-Urbana, a really weird, unique nationwide practice and practice doing obscenity defense, First Amendment work.
It's one of your professors?
No, this was a separate independent law firm.
Oh, okay.
That I worked for, Reno, O'Byrne, and Kepley.
Wow.
And they did obscenity defense. They defended dirty bookstores.
Right.
And they had Illinois Supreme Court cases, U.S. Supreme Court cases to work on.
Boutique practice, right?
It was a weird. Well, it was boutique on that, but it was also a broad practice too.
Right.
So there was a partner who represented the local hospital and a bunch of businesses.
Right.
And he had his son there and did the same thing, representing all these businesses. And then there was this little criminal defense group that represented the dirty bookstores and also murderers, drug dealers. They represented a football player named Craig Swope, who played for Tampa Bay eventually, who was alleged to have been involved in distributing coke. They were defending somebody from a death penalty case who robbed a bank, and the bank guard got shot.
Now, how big was that firm?
There was about 7 lawyers, but they also had a personal injury guy,
right?
And then they had an insurance defense guy. So you got to do research and just all kinds of
crazy.
Stuff.
For 7 people, that's a lot of work.
It was a lot of
that
different
covers
work.
A lot of ground.
They did everything.
That's
and
funny.
You could do research memos on it, and it was it was a lot of fun.
Right.
Gave you a little something extra to do.
So when you graduate, so you clerked for Justice Miller. Was that a year?
That was only in your clerkship, yeah.
And that was in Springfield, I assume.
Yeah, well, actually, mine was in Springfield because Justice Miller was based in Springfield. All the Supreme Court law clerks in Illinois, they work in whatever home district the judge is in.
Oh, okay.
So there are 3 in Cook County, and they're all downtown at the Daly Center. We're downtown at the Daly Center. Our guy had the 4th district, which is across the belt of Illinois. He was based in Springfield. There's a 3rd Circuit one, sort of Peoria Center, and they were near there. There was the 2nd district, which is all of northern Illinois. And for those that don't know about Illinois, there's Chicago, and then everything outside of Chicago is called downstate. Even if it's north of Chicago, and so everything outside of Chicago is downstate. And then there's somebody way down south in the southern half of the state that has a Supreme Court judge. Oddly enough, although we were based there, we were never really invited over to the Supreme Court to watch arguments or have cookies. All the other judges generally brought their clerks down for at least 1 or 2 arguments.
You would think, hey, see what?
We were back at the mill working away, whirring away. And the Supreme Court was famous for its cookies.
Right. Because
in Illinois, when the Supreme Court's in session, the judges actually live above the building. They have little apartments up there, and they have
I didn't know that. That's cool.
They're actually living in the building.
Wow. Interesting. So you do that for a year.
Right. And then I'm looking for a job.
Right.
And I'm a fat guy, in case anyone doesn't know that. And couldn't get a job with any of the big law firms. They just wouldn't take a chance on me. And this little boutique firm that was doing consumer class action work, Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes, suing people like that. They're like, great, come work for us. Went to work for them.
And they're in Chicago?
They're in Chicago. It was called Beeler, Shad, and Diamond. And I took to that like a duck to water because I actually understood that. Had a class in that when I was in law school, which is a cutting-edge class for the time on complex litigation. And I really enjoyed that, creating cases.
Well, it's interesting. You're finding wrongdoing.
You're finding wrongdoing. You're fighting against bad guys.
So I said you are one of the very few preeminent FDCPA experts in the country. How do you get from...
By accident.
And how's that?
one of the partners' wives had a collection letter, and he thought that somehow the collection letter was wrong because A, his wife didn't owe the money, and B, it threatened to sue his wife for attorney's fees, and there was no right to that. And he said, "Oh, there's some federal fair debt law. Go look it up." And I started
You're a smart guy. You're a former judicial clerk. Look it up.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, I'll go look it up. So I looked it up. I figured it out. There wasn't a lot of case law then. There weren't a lot of books on the subject. Now there's a nationwide treatise by the National Consumer Law Center on the Fair Debt Act that's excellent. But back then, all we had was U.S. Code annotated. There's a few annotations and the statutes in there. It wasn't very helpful, but I created a case, not for her, but for somebody else that we found had the same letter. And after much struggle, trying to get one of the senior partners to approve the lawsuit, I almost gave up. We finally got it filed, and it worked out okay. And then all of a sudden, that was my little area of the law that I just developed into my little vineyard.
Now you said you looked at the other firm you worked for when you were at Illinois. Hey, I can go into dirty bookstore defense or this fair debt.
Well, I got a job offer from the firm. It was attractive, but I didn't want to live down in Champaign.
Right.
I had enough of the cornfields.
Right.
And they're very kind people, but I turned them down. Maybe I would have been a better lawyer, had a better life doing that, but I enjoy where I wound up because my old firm, Beeler Shad, was right on Michigan Avenue, right at Grant Park. Offices looked out on the lake. It's kind of nice.
So you do this case, and you just
I almost gave up. I came within a heartbeat of giving up because the attorney made me go through draft after draft after draft after draft, and in the middle of it, he said, "This can't be true. You can't sue like this, and this seems too easy." And after people sue these debt collectors a few times, won't they just comply with the law?
Right. They're going to comply.
They're just going to comply with the law.
They'll get sued once, and that's it.
Yeah, they're going to just comply with the law, which maybe they'll comply with what you sue them for, but then they'll find 92 other things. And the industry's evolving. There's a whole new industry called debt buying that, presents all kinds of different challenges. So I just, they wanted the partners, the senior partners. I became partner there pretty quickly. But the senior partners only wanted big cases, big battles. Mine were all these little lightning, tiny wars.
Well, was that firm doing a lot of class action? Is that
it's almost all class actions, all kinds of Ponzi schemes.
Is that where you kind of cut your chops, so to speak, on class case? That's how you learned how to do class action. That's how I learned how to do class cases. And but meanwhile, those big cases can take 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Cost thousands and thousands of man hours, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and a few dollars,
Yeah, and whereas. And maybe they pay off and maybe they don't, but you had to have lines of credit to do them. Meanwhile, my little dirty war, suing these debt collectors, on smaller cases, was paying all the bills. Because, $4,000 here, $3,000 there, $2,000 there, it all adds up. And I didn't have any problem with that, but I was a partner too, and it was as if... the analogy we always used among some of the other, lower level partners was we didn't mind when the senior partners made us pay for the Mayflower that they developed and sailed over. And we didn't mind when they made us pay for the first retrofit. And we didn't mind when they made us pay for the second retrofit. But when they were on the third and fourth retrofit and they wouldn't even let us above decks to see where we were going, that was enough. So we kind of parted ways, and I was invited to leave with my dirty little specialty. And that was in 1999.
But at least you learned obviously a valuable tool.
Learned a lot. It was not all negative. I made good money there. I enjoyed it. I still like some of the people there. But going out on my own was the best thing I ever did.
Now, were you scared when you went out on your own?
I was frightened. Just frightened because my sister, after going to law school with me...
And your sister's name?
Mary Phillips. My sister, after going on to law school, she had gone on to get an LLM in German civil law but couldn't find a job, so she had wound up coming and working with my firm. And they always said we were separate and apart, except when they wanted me to leave, and then they fired her too.
Gotcha.
But then they wouldn't be honest about firing her. In fact, she finally had to ask him, am I fired? because they told her she's separate and apart. And the senior partner wouldn't answer her.
But no, don't you think, you're just kind of switching gears a little bit, what's pretty amazing is that, just kind of talking about you looking for a job and Mary, I mean, just coming out of law school, you're pretty worthless. Is that a fair assessment? Now, I don't mean just you. I mean any law student coming out of law school. Right. There's not much you can offer.
You don't know diddly poo.
Right, which is crazy.
Right.
I don't know if you're of the school that they should, at least the last year of law school, you can still take my tuition money. Just let me work somewhere and figure out what I'm doing, right?
Right. I learned how to think in law school, but not how to be a lawyer.
Right.
Luckily, I'd had that year clerking for that small law firm to see some of the stuff, so you got some idea of some stuff, but you don't learn logistics. You don't learn, how to copy stuff or what a copier costs or how to fix the copier, computer stuff or what it costs or malpractice insurance or any of the business end. And you're coming out thinking, oh, I'm going to be the best criminal defense attorney in the world, or I'm going to be the best business lawyer in the world. And when you come out, it's I'm going to be whatever they'll hire me to do in the world.
So what can I do to pay my bills?
That's right.
Well, so do you start your own firm with Mary? Is that right?
Well, we brought our practice out and we joined it up with a guy who had a traditional suburban practice named Bill Gomolinsky, wonderful guy. He did, a lot of real estate, divorce, all that kind of stuff. And we just kind of melded our two practices together out in a place called Hickory Hills, which is just north of where we are now in Palos Hills. Eventually, he moved on to become a state court judge.
Is he a judge now?
Yeah, he's one of the top associate judges there. He handles a motion call in law practice.
In Cook County?
In Cook County, yeah.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. So now it's just Mary and I owning the firm. It's called Phillips & Phillips. We've got an associate, Angie. We've got 5 paralegals, and we love what we do.
Well, so I want to work backwards a few things. So when did you start Fair Debt? In 1999?
1991.
91. Well,
1999 is when I got invited to leave.
Do you recall this? So when I was in the Army, this has to be 1992. So I owed the Army 4 years, and I'm kind of working if you're a JAG, kind of my rule, and I kind of saw this from my friends in the Army JAG world, was you either stay in one term and get out or stay in for 20, right? There was, to me, no middle ground. And I always intended, they paid for my school, I'm going to do my 4 and get out. So 1992 or so, I'm 6 months to getting out, right? If I can find, like you, if I can find a job. In fact, this is kind of a funny story. I had firms tell me, well, we don't do we don't do military trials or military work. I'm like, the rules of evidence are the same. Believe me, I can do pretty well in a courtroom. The rules are still the same, But in any event, so I'm reading an article in the Army, and I remember reading this to this day. So I'm in my office, and maybe it was a slow day in the Army. I'm reading the ABA Journal. Did you ever see the article?
When Reuben sues debt collector settles.
So Richard Rubin is, I would call him the dean of FDCPA.
Yeah, he's one of the three, 4 on Mount Rushmore. Joanne Faulkner, Dick Rubin, Bob Hobbs, Rand Bragg.
Right.
Dan Edelman's up there too. Right. They're definitely the deans. In fact, oddly enough.
So you saw that article.
Oddly enough, because I was in the middle of drafting that complaint, trying to get to the file.
Right.
That was the good housekeeping seal that finally convinced the senior partner to let me file the thing.
Right. So I saw that article. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This guy looks like a wonderkind. And I think it was Dick Rubin sues debt collectors. He's never settled a case for less than $7,500, and he's never had a trial. I was like, this is amazing.
Right.
And who even knew this law was out there?
That's right.
But so I've never forgotten that. So, and I, with bankruptcy.
Because the heading was when Reuben sues, debt collectors settle.
I still have that article. I cut it out. I saved it. It's been through a lot of, cut ups. It's discolored, but I have it now saved to my computer.
And oddly enough now, that's who I lecture on the Fair Debt Act with frequently, is Dick Rubin. We usually do a presentation on appellate developments. Right. And Professor Rubin, as I call him.
He's an amazing guy. I worked with a case on him. We had a case that got appealed, and we brought him in. And I tell people, astonishing to me. It is the best. I mean, he wrote this one particular 11th Circuit brief. It is the best piece of legal work I've ever seen. Astonishing, And so he still got it.
Yeah, that'd be my view of him too. He's astonishing.
And
solid guy and nice guy too.
Yeah, great guy. I mean, just salt of the earth. So all he's doing now is appellate work. Is that right?
Right, and less of that. He's just a good guy.
Right. There, in this world, in the fair debt world. I mean, just when I met you at one of these conferences a number of years ago, just a bunch of good people.
Yeah, there's very few people that are like personalities that are problems.
Right.
Most people are willing to share the information.
Right.
They realize it's a small community and there's strength in numbers, and it's always better to be together and share intelligence than to, pretend like you've got some sort of secret sauce.
So I'd like to do an introduction before you even get here. So I've done that already, and I talk about the breadth of cases you've handled in the Seventh Circuit. Do you know off the top of your head or roughly how many times you've been to the Seventh Circuit?
Probably 15 or so, 10 to 15, and about half of them we've won.
So we're talking the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, and that covers. And now I'm losing my
Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin.
Yeah, all right, Wisconsin. All right.
Right, and all my cases come out of Indiana and Illinois because that's where my practice is primarily. But we're handling cases around the country too.
Right. Well, so when you get to, and what this essentially means is you've lost at the district court level, right?
It's almost always that I've lost.
You've brought your lawsuit and you've lost, and then here you go. So do you take on a lot of cases to the Seventh Circuit, or are you choosy, knowing that you're now going to invest a lot more time and energy?
Well, yes and no. Sometimes you're choosy, and sometimes you kind of feel bullied into it. Sometimes you take them on for a point. Like one of the better cases we had was Randolph versus IMBS, where there'd been a split
I want to
case
interrupt,
law.
and I always cite to all the people I talk to, I call it Randolph versus IMS. You call it IMBS. Now, to me, that is one of the great cases. That's a great fair debt case. And I give you due credit. I always say Dave is the guy who brought it.
Yeah, well, in that case, the real simple issue was whether if a case somehow involved bankruptcy, could you only bring it in bankruptcy court, or could you bring a separate fair debt case in district court? And the courts around the country were just all over the board. In the Seventh Circuit, the courts had answered the same issue: yes, no, and maybe. Some could, some couldn't, none could. The Ninth Circuit had conclusively said no. So we brought a series of cases, and we got those answers: yes, no, and maybe. And we peeled them up in a group, and luckily Judge Easterbrook saw it our way and wrote a great opinion that compared and contrasted the two and said you can enforce both statutes.
Part of that opinion, where did he get that chart? So in that
he made it up himself.
You didn't? I thought you might have provided that. I was going to say, I was giving you credit for that. I was like, that's a brilliant stroke of genius.
We just our stroke of genius was there's no conflict here.
Right.
And two federal statutes don't preclude each other.
Right.
Some people mispronounce it and say it's preemption.
Right.
But that's federal versus state.
Right. It's preclusion.
It's preclusion, and it's a made up problem.
Right.
People can enforce both or one, and it's pretty clear in federal law, unless the statute says we are precluding this other one,
which is what it would say.
Right. But that was one of our favorite cases. We use it a lot. It's now actually in a different case out of this circuit, 11th Circuit on appeal in a case called Johnson versus Midland. So we'll see if the Supreme Court agrees or not.
Well, let's talk about that. So, we get a good ruling here in the 11th Circuit. I kind of joke to folks here, the 11th Circuit has turned even more consumer-friendly than the 7th Circuit.
Yeah, it has. It's been hot.
It's amazing.
The 11th Circuit has been
you know what?
On
and it's
fire.
not like, yes, we have a vested interest in it, but these are the right rulings. Just like you said, unless the Congress says it's precluded, then it's not precluded.
Yeah, it's not that they're gone off in some sort of unhinged, wild, liberal spree, which I don't think you could say any of the judges in the 11th Circuit are.
No, fair.
I mean, it's a fairly conservative, by the book group. But when people apply the rules fairly, you get to that result.
Right.
You really have to say, we want to rewrite the statute.
Right.
And, I think that's one thing that most people can agree on, which is the judges shouldn't be legislating.
Well, how do you think the Supreme Court? I mean, you're not a seer, but how do you think it's going to come down?
Well, there's two issues in Johnson. One is the preclusion issue. I think we have the best argument on that, and we should win it. I mean, if I was going to bet on it, I'd bet on it. The other part of there is whether filing time-barred proofs of claim in a bankruptcy violates the Fair Debt Act or states a claim.
Right.
I think we should win that, but I could see a possible loss there.
Right. Yeah, interesting.
But to get to the loss, I think the court has to legislate,
right,
not interpret the statute.
So we're waiting with bated breath down here.
Yeah, everyone thinks that, at least the appellate experts think it's going to be argued in early January, mid-January, right before the inaugural, and then a decision maybe sometime in June or July. So we'll see.
So now, just by talking to you, you've it's like anything else. When you master an area of law or whatever you're doing in life, right? You master something, it seems pretty easy. It's not easy, but you get there. Whatever you do, if you master it, it seems easy. So it sounds like you're pretty content with what you're doing.
I love what I do, especially in that a big chunk of my practice is representing elderly and disabled people, to just get the debt collectors to leave them alone, and when they won't, then I sue them to make them leave them alone.
Right.
And that is so rewarding, because not only are you getting the old people and older people some relief from people abusing them, you get them a little bit of money, and they're happy as could be. They write you letters about what people in metropolitan areas, even Birmingham, Chicago, Indianapolis, you think $1,000, what does that matter? Okay, $1,000. But to some lady living in Kentucky who wrote me a letter, said, well, let me explain to you what $1,000 means to me. I was able to get a new TV, black and white, not colored. I was able to buy some new underwear. I was able to fix my car. And I put some money in my hidey hole. Like, your hidey hole? And she put in parentheses, just a spot where I hide my money.
Right.
Or another lady wrote to me and said I was able to pay for my medication. And then they send you greeting cards. God blesses you, wishes.
Right.
It's really nice.
But beyond that, it's not like, I mean, what I tell folks from a lot of debt collectors, and again, we're on this side of it. We think we're on the right side of it. I'm sure debt collectors think they're on the right side of it. But I agree.
Oh, hang on. Let me just say this. I have no problem with debt collectors collecting debts appropriately.
Right.
If people owe the money and are able to pay it, and the bill collectors can prove they owe it, go ahead and collect it.
Right.
But you don't need to be rude. You don't need to be abusive. You don't need to trick people.
You don't need to violate the FDCPA.
You don't need to violate the
impunity.
FDCPA. Right.
With impunity.
We're not communists here.
Right.
I sound like I'm from the Godfather speech. We're not communists here. If they have the right to collect it, do it, and do it right.
Right.
And there's plenty of debt collectors who are able to do it right. So oddly enough, when we're enforcing this statute,
we're helping the good.
We're helping the consumers. We're also helping the honest debt collectors.
Right. Yeah, we're kind of policing the statute, right?
Well, that's what it said. That's what it did. It was set up to be a statute that's primarily enforced by private consumers. And that's what we're doing.
Well, a lot of times when I talk to my clients, and here's the analysis that I give to them. When you're being hounded by a debt collector, and I've had debt collectors call me like they've transposed my name as my client's name, and they start their games, and I don't even know that that's not even my debt, and it makes my blood boil.
Well, yeah,
right?
and if they're abusing the attorney like that. Imagine what they're doing to the poor and the elderly and the disabled.
It's not my debt, but it's my worry that on my client's debt that they may try to transfer to my credit report, which I'll sue in a heartbeat. But it makes me out of my head. I can feel myself tense up. And again, if it were my debt and they're treating me like this, I'd be out of my mind.
Right.
It's almost like I equate the bad debt collectors to it would be kind of like being a prison guard, as far as if that's your 8-hour day, picture how you are when you come home, right?
Yeah.
You got to be, it must take 4 or 5 hours to decompress.
Yeah, or are they going home and beating the kid and kicking the dog, or what are they doing?
It's crazy. But yeah, that's where you're right. I mean, the relief that folks get, even if it's not a lot of money for them, if it's them going on the offensive a little bit and pushing back and stopping that type of harassment.
I like to think of it as, most of these people have been beaten on by the system for whatever reason.
Right.
Job kept them down, health beat on them, this happened, that happened. And it's the one time that they get to stand up and operate the same sort of levers of society that the big people get to use. And some of my happiest clients are ones that I lost their case because we stood up for them.
Right.
The money was afterthought. They were just glad that someone stood up for them. And, how can you, I've never had to fire any clients. I get to go to sleep at night.
Right.
Don't think anything I did ever makes me toss and turn because I'm just working for people that I like. They're nice people.
And you get to deal with them on a one-on-one basis. I mean, it's kind of an intimate relationship, right? I mean, it's not doctor-patient, but it's close.
Well, but,
right? Or counselor.
When I talk to the older people, first thing they're doing is, God bless you for whatever you can do for me.
Right.
God bless you. Thank you. I always laugh a little bit and say, don't bless me yet. Wait until I put a check in your hand.
Right.
Then you can go light a candle in church for me or something.
Right.
And I'm sure some of them lit candles in church for me.
No, it's good. Yeah, I'm very grateful for that Dick Rubin article that then later on brought me to these conferences, meeting you and guys like you. One last point, you mentioned Dan Edelman is one of the deans of fair debt law nationwide. This is kind of a funny postscript. So Dan's from Chicago. I'm from Chicago. Dan's wife, Fran, worked with my dad. She was the head of the Chemical Society. So that's how I knew the name Edelman from way back when, having nothing to do with this. Isn't that funny? It's a small world.
It is a small world. You just never know.
But, one last thing I want to ask you. So you like what you do. I assume you're going to keep doing it.
Love what I do.
If you weren't doing this, what would you? Anything else you'd like to do? If not, rather, but anything else out there?
Not really. I mean, maybe open a hot dog stand, serve hot dogs. So after law school, when we're trying to get hired by the big firms, just trying to get a job, I actually had some kind of a black humor with one of my better friends, Jeff Berman, that I was just gonna throw it down and just go open a hot dog stand, something nice and simple. But I'm sure once you get into opening the hot dog stand, it's not nice. It's not simple. It's just as big a headache as anything. You got to make payroll. You got to hope customers come in.
That's funny. Well, talking hot dogs. So when I was 15, I worked at, I don't even know if it's in business anymore. This was, Wheeling area. Irving's for Red Hot Lovers. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think it still exists, or it did exist when I was growing up.
So it was a franchise, and I worked at a place. But I was just 15, and I was working like 40, 45 hours a week. I'm like, is this the rest of my life? Not knowing what I was going to do.
Yeah, because you knew when you came home, even if you cleaned up, you were still full of grease.
Yeah,
it smelled like French fries.
And they steam the buns, and all the way they prepare Chicago dogs. But I remember the whole reason I did it, or I was working like that, and I finally left because a buddy of mine, I'd never been to Arlington racetrack, right?
Sure.
And my buddy's like, hey, we got to go for opening day. I'm like, well, I got to work. He goes, we only do this once. Let's go. So I went, and I don't remember I don't think I got fired because I think I was doing pretty good work, but I think we just had a mutual parting But yeah, so talking about hot dogs, what about Portillo's? Is that not the best? That's some of the best food going.
And that started just north of one of our gas stations. It was we had gas stations along Roosevelt Road. Way back when we had gas stations along Roosevelt Road. That was in Villa Park on North Avenue. It started out as a little trailer.
That's crazy.
They made hot dogs. They would take the pots home at night,
right?
Because they didn't have any facilities.
Right.
They would take the pots home at night and clean them in their house. And now Dick Portillo, I think he sold he opened a bunch of hot dog stands all over, and I think he just sold it for almost $1 billion.
$1 billion. Did an investment?
$1 billion from hot dogs.
An investment company bought it, right? And did they have a total of maybe 40, if that many?
Something like that.
It's insane.
But all of his hot dog stands are great big things now. They're not stands. They're big full restaurants, good product. But that's a guy that maybe I could have had, maybe it could have been the
Phillips's
that's what
you should have
stands.
done, right? Hey, Mr. Portillo,
that's right.
I'm here to work.
That's right. But, being lawyers, we do have client problems. They're serious. We take them on. But usually our hands are clean. We're working inside where it's warm.
Right.
No one gets injured. Everyone goes home. Well,
that's
at night.
why I feel blessed. And like you, I love what I do. And I tell folks, people ask, will I retire? I'm like, well, I have no hobbies. I like to read. I like to work out where I can.
Sure, but you go on vacation when you want to.
Right.
What do I retire from?
This is kind of my hobby, what I do. And you're right, because it's very exhilarating just meeting with people, trying to solve their problem. Last question, because now I'm really hungry as we're talking. Favorite Chicago pizza?
Oh, I love Gino's East. Love Gino's East. Love Lou Malnati's. And then there's a kind of an offshoot, like one of the people that used to work at one of those opened a little place down in Crestwood, down by me, called Louisa's. And
is Louisa's? Are there several of those?
No, it's just one.
Just the one.
But it's all about they got the pans that are 50 years old that look like hell, but make great pizza crust. Great pizza.
No, what about Giordano's?
Giordano's is okay. Giordano's is okay. It's probably probably in the top 5.
But even if you took the worst Chicago pizza, it's still wonderful, right?
Yeah.
You start at the bottom of wonderful and move up.
Right. Right.
And there's one last thing I want to ask you. So I'm a member of the National Association of Consumer Advocates, NACA, right? And I joined that going back to when I probably went to one of the first conferences and heard you a number of years ago. Among some of the other folks, Pete Berry and Carrie Flitter are from Philadelphia. So how did you get involved with NACA?
Well, I was there when they were talking about founding it. I wasn't one of the founders, but I was one of the first members. So in 1990, 1991, they started talking about founding it. And I joined, I forget what my member number is, but I'm one of the founding members of it. So I've been with it since it started, and I'm now on the board of directors, and I'm the secretary of the board of directors. So I've been deep into NACA for years. I'm also a proud member of NACBA, National Association of Consumer Bankruptcy Attorneys, both of which do wonderful work, and I enjoy all those groups.
Right. Now, and both of them do just great work. And again, we're on the side, we have a vested interest in it, but it's the side that it just feels right. I mean, it helps folks, and it's just a good feeling.
Hey, but I don't have anything against the other side, because without debt collectors, there's not debt collection lawsuits.
Right.
Claims and claims made.
That's funny. So, well, listen, Dave, I've taken up enough of your time. I appreciate talking to you today.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate being invited in.
So I hope you enjoyed listening to that. Again, that was Dave Phillips of Phillips & Phillips out of Chicago, or Palos Hills, right outside of Chicago. But Dave's such a good guy, and just, like I said, of the top 10 names or 5 names in the country, I mean, he's always in that mix. I don't want to forget someone and name others, but his name is always in that mix, like I said. Really good guy. Again, we're sponsored by bondandbotus.com. That's BONDANDBOTES.com. Also, you can look up our book on Amazon. Bankruptcy, we wrote the book on it. And again, that's available at Amazon or bondandbotusbankruptcybook.com. And then finally, take a look at securityclearancedefenselawyer.com. Appreciate you listening. Thanks.